Okay guys, we are on page 7 today working on special quadrilaterals. So a parallelogram we've already been working with. That is a quadrilateral where the opposite sides are parallel. A rhombus is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. So these are still parallel, but then all the sides are congruent as well. A rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 congruent angles, which actually makes all the angles 90 degrees. And then a square is kind of a combination of a rectangle and a rhombus. You have all 90 degrees and all congruent sides. Okay, so use our properties to solve for x. So here I'm going to have these two sides are congruent. So 3x plus 14 equals 5x minus 8. So x equals 11. If this is a rhombus, that means all these sides are congruent and that opposite sides are parallel. But these two sides are supplementary, so they're going to add to 180. Scoop that over a little bit. So give us 13. Then for C, if this is a rectangle, that makes my opposite sides congruent, although that's true of all parallelograms actually, not just rectangles. So we'd set them equal to each other. All right. Okay, some more special properties of these parallelograms and their diagonals. For parallelograms, the diagonals bisect each other. We've already talked about that, but these special types of parallelograms have more properties. So for rhombuses, the diagonals are perpendicular, which also means they bisect opposite angles. For rectangles, the diagonals are congruent, so even though these are bisected, they're also the exact same as the other diagonal. And then a square is a combination of those two things. Also, since a square already had 90-degree angles, these bisected angles are all 45 now. All right, and then all of their diagonals are the same. Okay. So, if I know that this angle is 55, I also know that this angle is 55 because the opposite angles are bisected in a rhombus. So then we have 55 and 55 down here also. If these total are 110, then that makes these total 70, or each piece 35. And then angle 1 has to be 90 because it's perpendicular in the middle. For a square, angle 1 has to be 90, and then since this was 90 and it's cut in half, angle 2 is 45. And then for F, our rectangle, P and O is 25. And then alternate interior would tell us that this is 25. And since these are 90-degree angles, that means these two are 65. So Q and O is 90 total. NPQ is 25. QNP is 65. NPO is also 65. List the quadrilaterals for which the statements are true. Both of the opposite sides are parallel. Would be a parallelogram, which means it's all of them. Parallelogram, square, rhombus, and a rectangle. All sides are congruent is only true in a rhombus and a square. All angles are congruent is true for a square and a rectangle. They're all 90. Both pairs of opposite sides are congruent is true for all 4 types. So parallelogram, square, rhombus, and rectangle. The diagonals are congruent is true for a rectangle and a square. The diagonals bisect opposite angles is true for a rhombus and a square. The diagonals are perpendicular is true for a rhombus and a square. And the diagonals bisect each other is true for all 4 types. Classify as the most specific quadrilateral. So square is the most specific you can get if it fits all the properties. So let's take a look at some of these examples. So your diagonals bisect each other. That's all we know. That means really the most specific I can get is just a parallelogram. For part B, they don't give us a whole lot of information, and since we don't know these sides are parallel, really it's none of those 4 types. We can't say it's any of those. For part C, if all of these pieces are the same, but we don't know anything about the outside ones, we can use a rectangle. And then here, since we know that these are 90 and all of them are the same, it's a square. For E, we know they're 90, but we don't know anything about the lengths, so this would be a rhombus. Here we know that this is 90 and these are 90, so it could be a square. Here, these sides are parallel and congruent, which means it's a parallelogram, but we don't know anything other than that. And then this very last one, we don't know anything about these side lengths, but since it has a 90-degree angle, we know that this is a rectangle. I forgot to change this. It's actually 23 through 24. Okay, they both say worksheet 3 at the top.